Now, we welcome back to the show our friend Senator David Perdue, increasingly prominent senator. He's from the great state of Georgia. Mr. Perdue, thank you very much for coming on. We appreciate it, sir.
Good morning, Larry.
I want to talk to you about budgets and taxes and immigrants, but just, if I may, get a very quick take regarding the horrific events in Florida, Lauderdale Parkland, the school shooting. FBI Director Christopher Wray has apologized because the FBI had this guy, the killer, on their radar screen. They knew all about him. They knew his horrific tweets, but they weren't able to catch him in time to avoid this disaster. Governor Rick Scott, maybe soon to be Senator Rick Scott of Florida, has called for FBI Director Wray's resignation. Do you see it that way, Senator Perdue?
No, not really. I mean, I agree with the secretary, or the director rather. And look, it's a tragedy. I mean, we all know that, and we've got to find a way to close these gaps here in FBI. But this has been ongoing. This is not the first time that we've had a shortfall like that, and I'm confident that the director will get to the bottom of it and close some of those loopholes that we have in the procedures.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that. Now, among your many skills, you're a financial guy, former successful businessman, budget guy. I'm hearing from lots of critics, some Republicans, many Democrats, that the new budget, first of all, the 2-year deal passed in the Congress, and then the new President Trump and OMB Director Mick Mulvaney's budget. Senator, too much spending, too much borrowing, too much debt, not fulfilling Republican objectives. What's your first take on? You can talk about either the 2-year or the Mulvaney budget. What's your first take response to those criticisms?
Well, first, Larry, I want to commend you and Art Lappert for your great piece in the National Review today. I caught that this morning, and we can talk about it later or not. But
thank you, sir.
Going back to the budget, I agree with all of the above. Debt is what pulled me into this thing of running for the Senate. The budget reflects an investment over the next few years to try to solve this debt crisis long term. If you look at what we've done on tax, what we have to do on infrastructure, these are investments to try to grow the economy, which is one of 4 or 5 things that we have to do to solve the debt crisis. Doesn't feel good right now. The question is, can we make these investments provide the return that we all think that will be there? The infrastructure debate that we'll have later this year will be very interesting because there are high priority, high return investments, but they may not be the most politically desirable relative to what some of the senators and congressmen want for their districts and states.
So let me stay with that for a sec, because infrastructure is going to be an integral part of the budget debate, as well as the rebuilding of our infrastructure debate. I guess as I see it, Democrats want the whole kit and caboodle funded out of the federal government. The number $1.5 trillion is being bandied about. A public works program, good old-fashioned New Deal FDR public works program. The president has a different view, and as I understand it, he wants rather small amount, $200 billion over 10 years, so-called $20 billion a year, as so-called seed money. And he wants the states and localities to have the burden of responsibility. He wants private-public partnerships. He is willing to take a look at the whole issue of, toll roads and user fees. Let these private companies, who in many cases, like an energy or the electric grid, would do the whole thing by themselves. Maybe some reforms, get it done faster, not 10 years for applications, but 1 year or at most 2. Perhaps changing the local labor laws, Senator Perdue. Davis-Bacon, the prevailing union wage can gross up the cost by 30%. Are those things, is it feasible? This is long overdue, but is that feasible and still getting an infrastructure deal?
Well, this is a characterization of what the debate is all about in Washington. We went that way that the Democrats won. In 2011, they poured $1 trillion in a works program that gave us absolutely no stimulus and no impact on the economy. It's another manifestation of this big government solution that government creates jobs. What President Trump wants is to do a public-private partnership plan. Very much, and there's evidence of big programs that are already working today, Larry, that do that. The Power Africa thing, where we took $8 billion of U.S. foreign aid and attracted $48 billion of private investment to Power Africa. That's a big example of what we can do here in the country. Davis-Bacon has to go. We have to shorten the approval cycle, and there are bills out there right now that we are going to lop off time here, both in the administration and legislatively. This is something we have to do, but we have to make sure, again, that the priorities up front are the ones that present the greatest return on investment, so they can reinvest some of those savings in the 10-year period. But let me remind everybody, you just did the math. It's $20 billion a year, not $1 trillion all at once.
Now, that's very important. The toll road thing. I was on air debating a Democratic friend of mine, good economist, and a friend, but we disagree. And he sort of accused me of supporting, you want to toll everybody. Everybody's got to pay a toll now. That's the Trump plan. Well, way back when, Senator Perdue, I worked for Ronald Reagan. Reagan looked at user fees. Now, if I'm not mistaken, he did pass a federal increase, 6-cent increase on the gasoline tax. I want to get your take on that because President Trump has hinted that he might. I don't know where it's going in Congress. But my other point is, what's wrong? Easy Pass is the new toll. It's just easy. And that is a direct user fee. If you're, not on the highways, you're not going to have to pay for a gas tax. So what's your take on those ideas?
Well, the Democratic lack of receptivity to that is just mind-boggling to me. I mean, have you been in any of these Democratic states, the blue states? I mean, they're loaded up with tolls, and they have highway systems that reflect that. Look, the public-private partnership structure only works if you have a revenue source to provide a return for private investment. And the problem that I have with the Democratic position is they want everything to appear free, and it's just not. Sooner or later, somebody's got to pay for this infrastructure investment. So it's either going to be the people who benefit from it or the people who pay taxes. And that's what we've gotten to in this country. And that's the problem with what happened in 2011 with the failed Obama public works program.
Yeah, what did he say at one point? There are not enough shovel-ready projects? Because it took so damn long to do it.
Well, here's the example, Larry. I mean, we've got ports on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And it's only going to take a few $1 billion. It's not $100 billion. It's just a few $1 billion to deepen these ports, get them ready for these Panamax ships that are already coming in. The return on investment of those are somewhere between 5 and 10 times. Those are some of the highest priorities projects that we have. Secretary Chow has already talked about that. She had an op-ed last week to talk about how to prioritize these investments and how to use public-private partnership financing to get them financed.
If you give regulatory approval, the energy companies and some of the transportation companies would, Senator Perdue, build their own pipelines and their own LNG centers and their own refineries. The problem is the regulatory red tape burden stopped them from doing it, but they'd do the whole thing.
Well, they would. That's what happens in a free enterprise system. You see these big companies now stepping in on the healthcare front, starting their own insurance company. That's what happens when big government fails, like Obamacare and the infrastructure that we have right now. I think that's a manifestation of the fact that we've got a federal government that thinks that, we can over-regulate our economy into success, and it just doesn't happen. It is ridiculous how long it took us 17 years, Larry, to get approval to deepen the Port of Savannah 5 feet, and we're still struggling to find the federal money, even though the state's already invested it, to find the federal money to follow that. It'll be 19 years next year.
How can that be? I don't get. Where's the blockage?
Well, it's the bureaucrats. I mean,
environment? Is it EPA and things of that sort?
It's EPA, but it's also in other parts too, in the road system and so forth. Inside the Department of Transportation, there are roadblocks in there, and I think that what Secretary Chow is committed to is to get rid of those. And the example is, if you remember, right in my state, we had a burned highway system right in the throat downtown area in Atlanta, Georgia. Shut Atlanta down. It would have normally taken 2 to 3 years to replace that part of the highway. They got it done in 4 months because Secretary Chow and President Trump waived all the restrictions that came out of the federal government to get that done.
Well, that's the key. That's a great point. Elaine Chow's a wonderful lady, and I'm going to get her on the show. She's an old friend. Let me go back to the budget itself. You have proposed some budget reforms, if I'm not mistaken. You were not especially happy camper over the 2-year budget deal. Can you expand on that?
Well, first of all, there's some great news in this funding bill that just got passed 2 weeks ago. There's a clause in there that calls for the creation of a select committee. 16 members of Congress, 8 from the Senate, 8 from the House, all Republican, Democrat, even. And their purpose is to find a solution to this broken budget system and have it presented to Congress before December 5th of this year. I've been asking for this for 3 years. We've got 12 or so Republicans, 3 or 4 Democrats who are all calling for the same thing, and that is we need to create a politically neutral platform to fund the government. You know, Larry, in 44 years since we passed the 74 Budget Act, the federal government, the Congress has shut down the federal government 19 times. It's outrageous. This is the budget system's only worked 4 times in 44 years. It's one of the creating problems that creates this debt spiral that we're on right now.
What, not to go through all your thoughts, but some of the key thoughts for this bipartisan group?
Well, the first objective is to get to a politically neutral platform, and we have to develop a set of consequences that if we don't get the budget done on time and we don't get the funding done on time, that there are severe consequences, not a sequestration. That was the wrong way to go. I believe that Democrats now have seen the light, but and we have too, the Republicans, that this process doesn't favor either side. It basically creates the atmosphere for a lack of control and puts too much responsibility on the executive branch. Congress has absconded its primary responsibility of funding the government, and in that vacuum, the executive branch has stepped forward. You know that from your days in OMB. And so this is an attempt to get back to fulfilling the responsibility, the primary responsibility of the federal Congress is to fund the government.
So let me just go back. The consequence, using this new budget platform, let's say the consequences would be what, sir?
Well, there are a lot of proposals. We actually have a bill we put in 2015 from this working group that call for the budget to be a law. That's one of the problems. We have to streamline the system. There's not enough calendar time right now to do 12 appropriation bills, 16 authorizations bills, and a 3.5-month budget process. There's just not enough calendar time in the year to do that. And so if you don't get it done, there are things like no budget, no pay. There are things that cut the budgets of the staff and all of that inside the OMB and in Congress. There are various consequences being discussed, but my point is that any system will work as long as you have serious consequences. It's just that this system we have is perverse. It needs to be fixed, and we all know it.
And a couple of the Democrats that's in your group, you say it's bipartisan, which is good. A couple names of Democrats?
It's actually shocking, but, we've got very liberal Democrats. Sheldon Whitehouse and I vote differently on most things, and yet Sheldon he and I have partnered on a bill that actually has suggested some changes in the current process ahead of this select committee. What he and I, and this is his idea, that we pick a point in the future and we say, look, the debt should be a percentage of GDP. That's a target, and we develop a roadmap between the here and there with guardrails each year that gives us guidelines about how to get this debt reined in over a period of time. That's what the global bond markets are going to sooner or later require us to do. You know that. In order to maintain a strong dollar, we've got to rein in this unbridled appetite for debt, because we just can't keep sustaining it. The current budget that we're working under right now, unless something changes, is going to provide add another $10 trillion to the current $20 trillion of debt. Larry, I just don't think we can sustain that.
So let's just look at the OMB budget. Now, that's the president's budget. Nick Mulvaney's the budget director. Actually said in a hearing, if he were still a member of Congress and the Freedom Caucus, he probably wouldn't vote for it, but he's defending it. All right. Clever man. I think the world of Mick Mulvaney. But look, for all the criticisms of the OMB budget, when I look at the aggregates, Senator Perdue, it really ain't bad. I mean, spending as a share of GDP, which is what I think should be limited directly, but rule-based. Senate, it's around 20% of GDP over the 10-year window. Actually drops down to 19% of GDP. And the deficit estimates, sir, 4.5% of GDP. I mean, Obama had 10% of GDP for his early years. Their OMB deficits would be 4.5% running all the way down to 1.5% of GDP, which ain't bad. And, of course, they're basing it on faster growth. CBO has 1.9, OMB has 2.9 growth. I mean, I'm not going to look under the hood for so many details, Senator Perdue, but that's not bad as far as the aggregates.
Well, this is what Republicans stand for. If you have a thriving, growing economy, you have controlled expenses of a federal government. That economy, if you maintain expenses as a reasonable percentage of GDP and you constrain your debt to a percentage of GDP, then you end up in a solid financial base that allows you to do things like fund your military and have reserves for when you have crises like hurricanes. What we are doing now without that is we're losing the right to do the right thing. So I think this budget is a very responsible budget. If you look at it in its entirety, it invests in things that will provide returns, which will grow the economy. And the president knows that in last year, to get the economy going, we focused on regulation, we focused on tax and energy, and the economy is beginning to move. This year, he wants to focus on immigration, infrastructure, and trade. Well, you look at those 6 topics; those are all pro-growth topics. That if we can get it through Congress, this will enforce, I believe, the principles that are driving this economy right now.
And Senator Perdue, under the hood of the budget, I mean, we don't have time to go through all that, but they are going. This is the OMB budget. They are going after the entitlements, both the large ones, Medicare and Medicaid, and then the smaller ones, you know, SNAP, food stamps, welfare. And one of the ideas that President Trump is pushing is workfare, not welfare. In our last 50 seconds, your thoughts? Can those reforms get done?
Well, President Clinton actually did that with Newt Gingrich back in the 90s. This is something that is desperately needed. We're talking about saving Social Security and Medicare. Those trust funds go to zero in 14 short years. In addition, there's a lot of waste and fraud and duplication all over the bureaucratic side of the entitlement program. There's some $700 billion of waste out of $4 trillion. That's almost 20%. We can go get some of that.
I got to leave it there. Senator David Perdue from Georgia.